Imagine your physical world without property rights. Imagine if everything was state-owned. Outside of the abuse of power, that means you couldn't get a mortgage on anything. That means you wouldn't have the right to develop a product or service for someone unless you get permission. In fact, maybe someone says, I don't know if red suits are okay. Once you think about it, you actually realize, wait a second, I am living in a dystopian metaverse. Yes, we are digitally colonized, and that we are existing in a world where we're giving value to the platforms. We didn't think of data as a commodity. Data is kind of like everywhere. So how do I manage that? We should be able to not just capture its value, but capture its derivative value, because we're the ones creating and producing it and giving it to the platforms. But I don't think of these platforms as companies. With the size of people they're operating and running, they're nations. They're like a state.
It turns into this really weird monopoly socialist entity.
They control the means of production.
So let's talk about the Moca ID. You've been working on this for years.
So when we first wrote about this concept in 2018 called Content as a Platform, we described a world in where content itself, essentially, which is a digital asset in Web3, is a way in which you can build experiences on top, because communities build around ownership becomes a platform in itself.
And this is why Web3 will ultimately win over Web2.
Absolutely.
And capitalism will ultimately win over any type of control.
Yes, and that's exactly why the way to win in the space is to be as decentralized as possible, to be as open as possible, and to be as composable as possible. The way that we help inoculate ourselves, let's call it to our own disruption, is we become the most prolific investor in Web3. Imagine a future where we're all kind of invested in each other, in an ecosystem, not majority, just have a stake in each other. Are we going to collaborate more? Or are we going to be competitive more? Yes, there's competition, but we're ultimately going to work together because we all have a stake in each other. That to me is what Web3 means and what the future of Web3 should be.
The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs. Sharing our vulnerability. Overcoming our fears. Transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far can we go?
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is...
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Yatsu, the entrepreneur, investor, business leader, and gaming pioneer. You are the co-founder of Animoca Brands, a world leader in entertainment, gamification, and blockchain innovation. To date, you've invested in more than 450 companies with the goal to build an open metaverse based on blockchain technology and deliver true digital property rights for all. Your latest innovation is the Mocaverse ecosystem and the Moca ID, a novel digital identity system which you believe will revolutionize the Web3 landscape. You have recently said that in the future, we as individuals will become the platforms. Yat, welcome to London Real in Dubai.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always a great pleasure to be here. And that was a great intro. I'll have to just use that going forward.
No problem. You can have it. And it's such a pleasure to sit down with you. I always say you are the man that everyone needs to listen to when it comes to all things metaverse. You first educated me on the metaverse back in 2021. We had a remote interview. I didn't really know anything about it. And it all clicked when you spoke to me that day. Since then, we've had some epic conversations about what it means to have digital property rights. You taught me about your term digital colonialism. And we've also invested in quite a few Animoca ventures, including Mocaverse, Jason Ma's Open, and Life Beyond, which is the new metaverse that's going to be built on the Bitcoin ecosystem.
Indeed.
And so we're really excited to be partners with you, and I can't wait to sit down with you today and go deep. Let's start with maybe the State of the Union. We are now entering the early parts of 24. When you look back, what was 2023 all about, and what are we looking forward to in this year and maybe even 25?
So 23 was definitely a year of reflection consolidation and protection, shall I say. I actually just had a chat just recently about sort of, do you think your travel is going to be sort of, relaxing now, maybe that the industry is, basically a little bit better off, better ground than sort of the year before? And actually, I was saying actually quite the opposite. I'll probably be traveling even more. Last year, I traveled primarily because we needed to communicate to our own industry why they should still be doing what they're doing, why this mission is important, why this is greater than just, why there's a greater purpose in building a world that has true digital property rights. Remind ourselves that this is, there are going to be tough times, but what you're building is really important for the future of humanity, frankly speaking, in terms of what we see today. But now in 24, it's very much about sort of, well, now the market's grown significantly, especially if you think about what happened in Q4. There's a lot of excitement because of Bitcoin spot ETF, and the entire market's rebounded. I mean, it's hard to even believe that an asset class like Bitcoin basically doubled from just a year ago. I mean, it's and if you think about it, just a few months before that, it would have been actually more like triple. I mean, this is insane when you think about sort of such a significant asset that can sort of accelerate in this manner. And I think, so maybe the way to think about it is that Web3 was really about sort of, making sure sort of you're sort of protecting the base, right? And so I went to a lot of crypto conferences as well, really just espousing sort of, why are we here and what we're here for. And this year, our mission is basically to expand the ecosystem. So this is about growth. So I'll probably spend a lot more time in non-crypto conferences as well, telling people about sort of why you should enter the space and educating them. Because frankly, I think in 2023, talking to, people who are critical of an industry and trying to bring them in would have probably been mostly a waste of time, just because everything was against you. And in fact, people left the industry. I'm not talking about sort of, VCs that sort of, left for AI. I mean, yeah, sure, that happens, right? I'm just talking about just a lot of people were sort of wondering, is this really the right thing? And one of the problems is that, people often attach themselves to symbols, and that's kind of how you they're like memes in their own way. And FTX was a meme. I mean, pre-FTX collapse, he was kind of a hero, right? And when he fell, everyone was like, wait, what happened here? And there was a kind of cognitive dissonance in terms of, am I actually doing a good thing? There was that type of thing as well, right? And then, of course, we had the large albatross in the room, which was what's going to happen to Binance. To be clear, Binance has done incredible things for the industry. But there was a lot of concerns. People didn't know. But I think the Binance settlement really told us two things that gave clarity to the market, which is really, all we can ask for. The first one is that we treat it like a big bank, right? They join the ranks of HSBC or Deutsche Bank, Morgan Stanley, whatever group you name. It's basically sort of been penalized for KYC, AML sort of issues for a large sum of money, to be clear, but one that was certainly digestible, I believe. And the second one, of course, is that it also told us that the US does appreciate, I think, that Web3, crypto, and blockchain is here to stay. Because they could have done a lot worse things, and they didn't. And that told us very clearly that I think while there's going to be regulation, and obviously there's going to be rail guards and all the type of stuff that you should expect, what we should not expect is an intentional wipeout of the industry, right? A lot of sort of conspiracy theorists were saying, America wants to kill crypto, it wants to destroy it. That's not true at all, right? I think it's very clear that, it's certainly different departments, in the U.S. government don't have that same vision. And I think in some ways that is the beauty of the American democratic system, in the sense that, just because one group doesn't like it doesn't mean other groups have to agree with it. You are still, in a liberal system which has to basically protect the interest of either the majority or minority. It doesn't really matter. The point is that, there is a discourse to be had. And it was very clear that basically blockchain, Web3, and crypto are here to stay.
They could have done worse. How?
Well, they could have sanctioned it.
Right.
I mean, they could have treated, if they wanted to, treat it like a Mexican cartel or something like that, right? And that would have been pretty disastrous. And certainly, again, I'm not in the backroom conversations. I don't know anything that happened there. But to me, that was available. There were many reasons you could justify if you wanted to, and they didn't. And I think they didn't do it, and this is pure speculation, because they also appreciated that it was important to people's lives. Right? I think it was going to affect people's lives. It was going to be something that was important, and it was also an innovation in technology that was here to stay. We should also point out that in 23, many other jurisdictions, places like Hong Kong, went the opposite way and decided we're pro Web3 and blockchain. We're going to grow this ecosystem. And Hong Kong has seen huge dividends from this approach. I mean, if you think what happened with both ApeFest and the fintech festival in Hong Kong actually late last year. It was a huge success with so many people from the world coming to Hong Kong for the first time because of their sort of, I guess, big sort of emphasis on Web3 and digital assets.
And you're based there, and you're on the Hong Kong task force as well.
Correct.
They said 6 months ago that they were going to bringing retail in or open to retail.
They are.
And they are.
Yes, they are. So you have a certain set of tokens that are tradable on for retail. You have 2 licensed exchanges now in Hong Kong that are officially licensed. We just announced a partnership with one of them, which is Hashkey. So to do some pretty critical stuff and to help onboard more people. And of course, Hong Kong, as another place, has had its sort of fair share of sort of small scandals here and there. But the point is that they understand that this is the path forward, and that you have to basically sort of grow the space, and you have to make it safe. And to make it safe, you have to bring in regulated players, and you have to put a framework for regulation. And they went out with a consultation paper on stablecoins, for instance. Hong Kong launched green bonds, for instance. And I mean, we've said this earlier, but the HKMA actually, I think last year, even sort of issued a statement to the banks basically saying, hey, companies that are in Web3 and crypto need a bank account too. Basically, you have to bank them. And that was sort of huge news. I can't think of any regulator in the world or monetary authority that would have sent a letter like that to all of their sort of banking constituents.
So you've been impressed with the action, not just the talk. They've really backed it up and gone even beyond what you might have expected.
Yeah. And I think, just to be clear, and I think, Emily at CoinDesk sort of framed this quite well when she said that it doesn't necessarily mean that the regulation is easy. It just makes it clear, right? And so clarity is all you want. And I think this is what people want in the US as well. They don't need it to be easy, right? You want to be compliant, and they want to understand what are the rules that we all think make common sense that we can rally around. The problem is when you don't have rules, you're pushing people offshore, you're pushing people away. In some ways, you can apparently wipe your hands clean and say that was none of my business, but of course it's your business, and you have to get involved. And I think that's a signal, right?
Right. So that's powerful for Hong Kong. You've been a part of it, and it's going to continue to grow. I've been watching all the parties you guys have had out there, and I've been very jealous. I am going to come to Hong Kong next year.
Please do.
For sure.
It's a lot of fun.
Or this year.
Yeah.
Because I want to feel kind of the flavor of what's going on there.
The most important thing isn't so much just the parties itself. It's just sort of the end state that you see. It's the energy. What I've noticed is that the energy, not just in people in finance or in business, but especially amongst young people. And young people are excited because I think they see prospects, they see hope, they see a path in which they can make a difference and in which they can be part of something that is greater than themselves, which is really, I think, what most people ultimately aspire to somehow, a mission and a purpose, in which you can also grow and benefit from. And I see this very similar to kind of like the growth of a national identity. When you're part of a growth story of a country or a city or a place, you build together. And you have a sense of pride in it. And, there'll be tough times, whichever, but you're fighting for it together. And there's hope. And the people who are building it aren't just the people who have money. It's actually people who don't have as much money, but they see an opportunity. And this is, I think, one of the reasons why I think Web3 and blockchain is very much unstoppable. It's not just in what we might historically have classified as developing countries, say like Philippines or Indonesia or Venezuela. That adoption is going to happen anyway. And places like Philippines are very, very pro-crypto now. I remember, last year had the opening keynote speaker at the YGG conference, which is, all about blockchain games. The equivalent of Gary Gensler, essentially, their sort of SEC equivalent chair, was a keynote speaker to basically extol sort of, the importance and purpose and vision of why crypto is so important for Philippines. I mean, it's a completely different context, but of course, we know that it's had a major impact in that country. But also when you think about the younger generations everywhere around the world, actually, how do they get financial inclusion? How do they actually get a participation? It's only Web3. I can't actually think of any industry in the world today which can include more people into modern financial rails than Web3. A lot of activity, as you know, was happening, especially in 23 around AI. And while AI, I think, is very much has a potential and has already demonstrated to be a net good to humanity and has a lot of great potential, the ones who actually benefit financially from it is a small elite club who got into OpenAI or who got into Perplexity or who got into whatever major AI company. Those are the beneficiaries. That's the Web 2 model. Those are the people who basically benefit from it. And the regular person, remember, when you start using the AI, you're actually enriching the AI as well. The value of the AI isn't just data that they fetched. It comes from the prompts, the questions you ask.
Digital colonialism all over again.
It is exactly the same model. So in some ways, we're receiving some value, but we're being fooled again as to who actually receives the real value behind it. And it's the companies and institutions behind it. So we're, again, feeding the beast so they can sell stuff back to us at a higher price or whatever price. And I think this is, again, the part that Web3 changes so fundamentally. And why I think we see this rebirth that we're seeing right now, sort of this rising of sort of Web3 and crypto that a lot of people had sort of, written off that are not in the industry a year or a year and a half ago, is because, again, when you think of it, there is no other industry I can think of that can include really the masses to opportunity, hope, and financial inclusion.
Right. It doesn't even hold a candle to all of the possibilities of AI. This will probably educate and onboard more people faster than any other tech out there.
Correct. And I think of AI as an accelerant to Web3.
Yeah.
I don't think of them as two mutually exclusive categories or even two parallel categories. To me, they're completely integrated because the regular, let's call it person, will benefit from the growth of AI because of Web3, because he can now have ownership, as opposed to someone who will just feed someone's central database. They'll just get richer and deeper and better and stronger. And then they'll sell it to you. I mean, I think of, for instance, like Tesla, great innovation, wonderful. But every person who drives a Tesla is making the Tesla smarter. And then they sell you a car that's more expensive next time because it's a smarter car.
Yeah.
It's like who did what work? And I'm not saying that the car doesn't have value and that you shouldn't pay for the car. But the point is, you contributed to making the car more successful. And I do believe that there are categories of people, right? There's some people who contributed more value to the car because they drive more. And so if someone drives more and gives more data, why should they pay the same amount of money for a person who barely uses the car? I mean, I think of them it was entirely different, actually, even though it's still ownership of a car. And the value paradigm is all in the data that generates this AI.
Yeah, very much so. So we covered the West. We've talked about the East. Talk about this region, because you just kind of got to the Emirates now, but before that, I think you were over in Saudi.
Correct.
And a few months ago when I was here for Future Blockchain Summit, you had announced, I think, a letter of intent with Saudi government, but now they've actually invested in Animoca brands. What does that mean? What's it like doing business with Saudi? What do we expect from that region?
So I think you're referring to the NEOM partnership and announcement. And obviously, we're really happy about this partnership. What it means is that Saudi as a region is now seriously looking at how to enter Web3 and blockchain. NEOM is this crazy project, right? It's basically building out this special economic zone that's basically like its own country. And, for anyone who hasn't actually looked at sort of vision and dreams of NEOM, do take a look at it. How, the line, Octagon, all these crazy sort of projects. But for someone like myself and people in, let's call it, our part of the world, it's actually not that crazy to essentially build a new country, because that's what China did. When you think of the Pearl River Delta, when you think of Guangdong province, when you think of Shenzhen, we have seen, for those who lived in Hong Kong, a place that was essentially marshland for a while, that essentially turned into probably one of the world's globally most successful and fastest growing economic zones, probably in the history of mankind, over a really multi-decade period. And similarly, most people around the world basically poo-pooed it, said the Chinese experiments are going to work, their approach is nonsense, they're going to spend all this money and it's all going to fail. And today, China is competing with the US as the preeminent economy in the world, right? And this comes from executing a vision of really wanting to transform a nation. But it also needs to come with a kind of top-down, purpose-driven force, which China had and Saudi has as well. So there's many parallels. And that's one of the reasons we decided to really double down on Saudi, because we do think, certainly for the region and potentially beyond, this could be, the Saudi age. Because you have a very visionary leader who basically is inspiring the nation. Some of the interesting parallels that we're seeing as well is who's coming back to Saudi. So, what really helped China grow was what we call the return of the sea turtles, right? The sea turtles are people from China who left China because it was not so great. It wasn't, didn't have all the education, they didn't have all these benefits. They went to study in the US and Europe, whatever, and They built a life elsewhere. And they never thought they'd go back to
Austria. Some of them went.
Yeah. There's a few of us that went to Austria, and we hung out at the Danube, right? And we came back. And why did we come back? Because we saw a vision, we saw potential, we saw opportunity, and we saw basically a place where you could build something in a stable setting, where we could also potentially make an impact that really, really isn't just better for us, but better for the entire community that's involved. And that's the same spirit in Saudi. So when you go there, you'll meet, especially in the big cities like Riyadh or Jeddah, you'll see people who are just excited about the future. Young people are excited about the future. It's also a very digitally sort of native place. I think over 80% of the population is under the age of 36 or 38. It's very young, and they all play games as well. So you have an esports minister, for instance, right? And Saudi is also the largest gaming investor in the world. They have a sovereign gaming fund with Sabi. That's like $38 billion in size, right? It's quite something. So they're really trying to transform the country, and they want to build essentially, a smart city, and they want to basically have a vision in which they can sort of build a future nation with the best available technology there, including AI and Web3. And that's kind of where we come in. Like, our role is to come in and help them basically build out that vision. And obviously it's not going to be an easy project, but we're really honored and excited because that's, again, part of our goal is to create impact and purpose. And I think there could be nothing more impactful than being able to have a role in playing a vision of the future that is manifested in a physical sense.
What's it like to do business in the Middle East? I've gotten to know some people here in Dubai and, some different sheikhs. And I remember I had a conversation with one of them, and he said, some Americans were going to come through town, and they were going to be raising money for a fund. And they said, oh yeah, we're going to fly in for a week and raise money. And he looked to me and he said, yeah, good luck with that.
Yeah.
And he said they came and they talked to us and they left with nothing. Because over here, it feels like to do business over here, the relationship is first, the business is later. And maybe that's similar in Asia.
It is very much similar to Asia. And it's funny you would mention that because so the very first time I met Sam as an SPF physically was actually in Riyadh at FII. And that was the one time and the only time I also, I guess, saw him in a suit. And some people were sort of commenting on the fact, after the fact, of course, were saying, Sam wearing a suit, maybe that should have been a warning signal. But either way, the point was that was exactly what they were doing, right? A bunch of guys were coming in, basically thinking they could raise some money. Clearly, he needed to raise money, but, people didn't know the circumstances. But how many times did he visit Saudi? How much did he invest in the region? What did he do? Did he try to build relationships? And I think the answer would have been fairly small in comparison. We spent a lot of time in the region. We didn't actually look for money. The kind of capital that NEOM is giving us is, obviously a big sum, but in the context of our business, not the material part. We expect to be making more investments and more capital commitments that ultimately in the long term will exceed, that amount. We actually invested in Saudi's very first NFT marketplace, Nukta, before we even had conversations with government. We saw a vision in the future and a great founder. She's a woman as well. And to us, this was part of sort of what's exciting. It's not that she's just building in Web3. She's also a woman in Saudi, which is, breaking all the old stereotypes, which of course, when you're in Saudi, those don't exist anymore.
That's what I heard.
Right?
You get there and it's not what the papers tell you it is.
Exactly. But so the papers are describing a Saudi, certain papers, shall I say, are describing a Saudi that might have been 5 to 7 years ago. But that kind of vision that was building out there. And it was exciting. And we saw an energy. And so, when you do seed investing, by the way, right, you can't build on the classic fundamentals. When we invested in 2018 and 2019 in companies like Axie Infinity and OpenSea or acquired the Sandbox, there wasn't an industry to speak of. You had to feel the energy, and you had to look at the sort of, the spirit of what they're doing and whether you believe in the vision, and you back that. Because at the end, especially at that stage, you're backing people to build something. You're not, and of course a belief in the growing industry, but you're not, backing a sophisticated, mature business that had like proven track record. That comes much later. And we saw that in Saudi. And also because there was so many active gamers. My first meeting with the prince, basically of esports, shall we say, was an esports competition, right? We were watching Rainbow Six for hours, commenting on the game. which of course to me was also eye-opening, because my expectation for a first-time visit to Saudi some years ago was more like, are we watching camel races? I mean, I know that sounds terrible, but that was just kind of the impression you have from outside. And no, they're watching, one of the most advanced video games, duke it out, and learning about sort of that culture. So it's very exciting. And I would encourage everyone to look at Saudi. Whether you can be critical one way or the other, I understand. We're not asking people to go in just blindly, right? But you have to see it yourself. Because it's a little bit like when people were criticizing China as well. Living in Hong Kong and doing business in China, all the criticisms that were put out were from people who hadn't been really in China in many ways, saying the whole system will fail and there's corruption, all that kind of stuff. They haven't seen it. They haven't touched it. This is not to say that there aren't problems that need fixing, but that's true for everything, I think, right? Progress is never a straight line. It's also not linear in any way, and it's also not predictable, right? If progress was predictable, it'd be a very different world. The whole point about progress, the whole point about growth, is the fact that it is edgy, because innovation in its nature is edgy, right? If you don't have edgy innovation, you don't have changes that can impact the world and uniquely transform it. So to me, they go kind of hand in hand. That's why I think again, it's easy to throw rocks from a distance. Come and check it out.
Yeah. No, that's really well said. And another thing that I think is a misconception in this region is it's easy to raise money. And you're talking or you're talking to people that aren't as educated as the New York bankers or the Hong Kong bankers.
I think this comes a little bit down to the fact that one, maybe it's a little bit of convenience to say, again, I've heard this comment. I always have to correct it and say, this is, very smart money. I think the thing that some people might not appreciate is that I think the region, and by the way, I think this is true for the UAE as well, they're not afraid of taking bets, right? So it's not so much about whether it's easy or not. It's actually very difficult money in the sense that it's not difficult in terms of once they're your partners, they're great partners, but due diligence, informing them, understanding, all that stuff, I think it's up there with all the most sophisticated VCs, maybe even more diligent, because often it's government money or it's related to the governments. And as you know, that's going to be stricter. But I think it's a little bit of convenience in terms of, I don't want to raise money here, so it must be easy. Or maybe also a little bit of sort of justification, right? It's these guys don't know what they're doing. And I think this comes also because when companies are raising money from other industries, it's like, let's say, when Scopely was acquired, for instance, right? Or when I forgot the name of the esports company that was acquired, or when they made all these investments in gaming companies. A lot of the criticism came from gaming companies that didn't receive the investment, right? We're just, and it's like, of course, right? They got it. It's not that they tried, it's more just like a sort of maybe a kind of potential sort of justification out of that. But what I wanted to say was that they're not afraid of taking bets, meaning they're not afraid of losing money for the right causes, I think, if it doesn't work out, because they recognize that inherently when you take investments, there are risks involved, right? But if it pays off, the value is way more than whatever you may have lost in other areas. That is the nature of investment, by the way. Right? I mean, if you invest in something that you want to be certain, then you are a very different kind of investor than if you're an investor who wants to create transformative change. Right? I mean, one of the other areas of investment that Saudi is doing is green energy, which is, by the way, the same thing that China is doing as well, right? It's arguably very risky. How can you really predict where that's going to go at this stage, for instance? But the fact that they're making these investments, some that will go wrong, those that will go right, are going to go very, very right, because if you believe in green energy and sustainable energy, then that's a general path forward.
Yeah, they're clearly comfortable with risk here because they're building the tallest building in the world and the most beachfront property ever, and they clearly have a comfortable relationship with taking risk. Of course, with that comes probably good due dil.
It does. And I think also as you make more investments over time, the due diligence gets better and more sophisticated because they're learning in the process too. I mean, we're here in Dubai. What is Dubai? I mean, Dubai is, to me, the physical metaverse manifested in the sense that there is literally sand, right? And they built essentially stuff from scratch, right? The conference I'm attending is at the Palm. I mean, that entire space did not exist. And here it is with like luxury hotels and tourists and commerce and trade, and a vision. And today, Dubai is a place which is not really dependent on its traditional businesses, right? I think I read somewhere or heard somewhere that I think the region was really well known for pearls.
Pearl diving.
Yeah, pearls.
Yeah.
I mean, wow.
Can you
right?
imagine?
Can you imagine? Dubai was like, one of the pearl diving centers of the world. I mean, good on them. But if you didn't make any investments on the future, and we'd be having fishing villages and pearl divers, and no vision of future for basically the region. So yeah, I think it's outstanding. You need to have bold vision to build a bold future.
A physical metaverse manifesto. It is what it is to me. And it's not only the physicality we see, it's the mindset. They put together, a type of world that they want to live in with certain rules and disciplines and motivations. And now they've attracted to their sandbox,
yes,
if you will,
that's correct.
The community and the culture that vibes with that environment. And so you got people that are moving here from all around the world because this is quite frankly, a better place for them to be. And it usually involves commerce, capitalism. It usually involves them making money and working and providing value to maybe people back home. And it's just an incredible place to be.
I mean, the principles to me is not that different from when you think about the historical philosophical discussions around what is the good life. And Dubai is a promise of a good life for a certain kind of person. It may not be the good life for every person, but it doesn't have to be. And I think it offers an opportunity for people who are looking for the things that you just mentioned, for growth, entrepreneurship, hope, opportunity, that are greater, bigger, or better than wherever they might be, right? That is the story of America, by the way. Why does everyone immigrate to America? I mean, America being essentially, a nation of immigrants. Again, hope, opportunity, entrepreneurship, capitalism, all these things. Again, to live the good life, whatever that may be to them.
Yeah, it is. There's a lot of weird parallels, and there's a lot of places where those break down as well. And I almost was seeing these two different places, maybe in different life cycles as well. And so I think the West can learn a lot from this place. Unfortunately, I think it's blinded by its own past and maybe ego, and it's hard to see maybe some of the benefits of this.
I think the West is maybe less struggled. My view would be it's the past, maybe a little bit of reflection, but I think unfortunately, they're too focused on the present. As in, they're not focused on the future. They're focused on the present in terms of obviously the problems, which of course is relevant. I'm not saying that's not important. And then they're touching, because if they actually went back to their past to try to solve problems in the present, they'd actually come to similar conclusions in terms of, capitalism, that kind of works, right? But actually we're going further into a different rabbit hole for political reasons and for agenda purposes. A lot of people are now embracing an anti-capitalist narrative, which I think is really, really dangerous, which is actually not how those countries grew. None of these countries grew and had success and brought opportunity and created the narratives that we see today because of an ultra-socialist or perhaps even communist direction. But yet those conversations are now coming back, and that's fascinating to me. So they're not learning really from history, because just actually open up the books of history and just take a look at what worked and what didn't work and take that judgment. And I know people can pick and choose, but I think by and large, capitalism is actually what built the wealth of nations around the world, as Adam Smith so rightly put it.
Yeah, and this is very important because this will probably dovetail in some things we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
And my stepdaughter's in Boston right now going to a university there, and conversations of Marxism are the standard there.
It seems fashionable in some places almost.
Yeah, and it's fascinating because, like you said, a couple hundred years earlier, it was built on the opposite, and also the things that come along with capitalism, which are certain freedoms that I'm sure we're going to get into. What I always find interesting with you, Yat, is that we start talking about blockchain or crypto or the metaverse, and we end up talking about property rights and freedom and maybe what's best for humanity. And I think most people don't see how those are inextricably linked. You're one of the few guys that always really tells me that, and I'm always left really thinking hard that this isn't just about, some world where you put goggles on. This is actually just a reflection of our own real physical worlds and what's really important.
Yes.
And you wrote a really fascinating article on Medium recently, and I'm still trying to get my head around it, even though it's not a long article and people should check it out. But you titled it "The Labor of Our Time and the Work of Our Minds." And you started off with a very interesting assertion of this concept of content as a platform, and even us as individuals of owning that content and of us being the platform. And I'm wondering, why did you write that article? How do you have time to write that article? Because you're traveling around the world. And one thing you didn't mention earlier that I want to call attention to is there was a leadership vacuum after everything that happened with Bankman-Fried and all the other scandals in 2022. And let's just say it plainly, you and your team stepped up and got out there and told the world that blockchain's here to stay and Web3's here to stay, and nobody asked you to, and nobody officially anointed you. And I'm sure you would be the first to say it wasn't you, but you were out there with Robbie and all your people just saying the word.
Yes.
And so that's noticed and really appreciated.
No, thank you. And it was important for us to make people know that it's greater than that, right? And so our purpose of going out and, as I said in 23, all the travel was really to, in some ways, evangelize the space, but also to remind people that it's not just about prices, for instance.
Yeah.
That it's about a bigger thing, about digital freedom, about digital property rights, and that what we're building is really ultimately of great benefit to humanity. And also, I mean, I've said it earlier in your show as well, is that I actually think it also helps save the capitalist narrative. I mean, last year was a year where I spoke about this on the TED stage, which was an incredible experience. At the same time, somewhat terrifying, as I had probably shared with you, but important, because that's when I realized also that so many people didn't understand what Web3 and blockchain and what crypto can really create and what the opportunity really is to people and to humanity.
Did people get that? People can watch that talk online. It's short, right? So it's under 10 minutes.
It's like 11 minutes, yeah.
Right. What was the reaction? And did you find that people understood or could start to understand what Web3 was, as opposed to a bunch of degens? They could literally see, it reflecting humanity.
So, I mean, I think that talk and subsequent conversations with different people actually really helped solidify the thinking that this was much greater than just what they see. Because obviously when people talk about Web3 and crypto, often they just look at the price of Bitcoin. And that seems to be it. And the problem is that when you just look at prices, you kind of get blinded to what it really means. It's like saying, you look at currency prices or you look at stock prices and it's supposed to mean something somehow, right? Yes, there's value attached to it, but it's beyond that, for instance, right? And I think that's actually when they understood that, they could change capitalism, the fact that actually, yes, we are digitally colonized and that we are existing in a world where we're giving value to the platforms that are actually essentially taking over all of our value and then basically spitting it back to us in like small chunks of mini value and then selling it back to us. Like all these things, once you think about it, you actually realize, wait a second, I am living in, a dystopian metaverse, one which is completely controlled by those platforms. And, I said this many times, you don't own your Instagram handle. You don't know, you know this yourself. Your videos got deplatformed for content that someone disagreed with, for instance. But who is that person that disagreed with on that content? I think, take Facebook as an example. Even recently, I think Canada had a problem with their news agencies distributing their news freely on Facebook because there was a conflict around prices that Facebook said, I want to pay that. So a centralized institution basically took down effectively, I would say, the very thing that's supposed to be a guardian of the democratic institution of a whole nation. Just think about it, right? And they say, yeah, that you could access it differently, all that kind of stuff, but that's not true, because we know today that most people will get their news on these type of platforms. They don't go to the website, they get it from the platform. So the role is far, far more relevant than just saying you have choices, because just because you have a choice doesn't mean that actually you can reach it or even know how to reach it, because Facebook's not encouraging you to say, well, you can't read it here, but guess what? You can go here and here, read it, right? They're not doing that. They're just not giving it to you. To me, that's the same as censorship. And why do they have the right to censor anything? And so that's the issue, right? And in a government in the country, you have a judiciary. At the end of the day, you have a court system. You can go and say, you can't evict me, or you can't take this away from me. But in the current Web2 platforms like Facebook or X or YouTube or Google or whatever you want to name it, actually you don't have any rights.
No, and that's why I listened a little more intently when I listened to you, because I am on the sharp end of that stick right now. I had content. I spent 12 years putting up my content. 2.4 million subscribers on YouTube, 14,000 videos. Most of my life is up there.
Yeah.
I thought it was my digital property, but it wasn't, and so it's been taken away from me.
Yeah.
And now my own freedoms of expression were threatened.
Yes.
I cannot take it to any court. I can't even really talk to the company about it.
Yeah.
And they use that threat now as a means of controlling everybody else. Now, some people I meet in the street say, oh, this is a good thing, Brian. Now people know that you're censored and they can see it. I'm like, no. Censorship works. Out of sight, out of mind.
Yes.
And that's what they've done to me and many others. And most people don't know what's happening.
The insidious thing about this type of action, which, by the way, is what typically is a hallmark of dictatorships and places that sort of have tyranny, even if you call it a benevolent dictatorship, is that you start to self-censor. Because you start to say, well, maybe I shouldn't say that, even if I think it's important, because of the consequences that may happen. And that's actually really dangerous. Freedom of expression doesn't mean you get to insult people. I think there's a distinction between that. You don't get to hurt people. But you do get to share opinions that might be uncomfortable, or you do get to share something or talk about something that maybe someone doesn't want to hear. And because of, this emergence of a very strong cancel culture, people are worried about that. And then who ends up driving that aspect of that culture? Someone somewhere gets to decide what is right or wrong. But he wasn't actually appointed. Whether it's through a democratic process or a delegated process, doesn't really matter. That person was not appointed in that role because the people in the platform said, you're appointed. It's one thing if we get to elect maybe our censors, maybe some of us issues, but it also means that I don't like what you just did. Everyone knows that it's controversial, so maybe I can change that. The problem is that we don't have that choice. We don't even know who they are, right? And they're kept anonymous intentionally, but the problem is that if you are worried about anonymous hackers in crypto and Web3, or just anonymous people, you say, oh, he's anonymous. So, that's bad, right? How can I trust you if you're anonymous? Then how should we trust an anonymous censor who I don't know who you are? How do I know that you're accountable for your actions when I can never find you? And again, it's not for the threat, it's for being accountable. Because if I know who you are, then my actions, even if they're unpopular, I live by a standard that I think there's a reason and I'm ready to defend it.
To continue watching the rest of the episode for free, visit our website londonreal.tv or click the link in the description below. So Jim Rickards has just recorded a video that's not available to anyone in the public, and he's going to be talking about how this upcoming recession is going to be fast, it's going to be bloody, it's going to be nasty. But at the same time, he's going to show you how you can position yourself to profit from all of this chaos. Now, we've made this video only available to our viewers. Go to londonreal.tv/Jim, watch that immediately. I can't say enough good things about Jim Rickards. He understands the global economic system better than any guest I've ever had on London Real. His predictions are almost uncannily true, and you can learn how to profit from his vision, from his expertise, and his understanding of economics. So go to londonreal.tv/Jim or click the link below. It's an excellent, excellent look on what's going to happen in the future and how you can position yourself to profit from that. Jim is one of the best in the business, one of my favorite guests on London Real, and he's very, very good at predicting the future and showing us all to profit from it. So click the link, and I hope you enjoy.
Hey, it's Brian Rose, founder of the DeFi Academy. I've told you my 4-week crypto bootcamp is amazing, but don't take my word for it. This is what my students are saying.
The DeFi Academy was an amazing experience for me. It took me totally out of my comfort zone.
In this course, I was challenged, I was held accountable, and pushed to do things that honestly weren't always easy.
It's been phenomenal, and I can't believe we're already up on our 4 weeks. It has flown by.
Going through this DeFi accelerator, by far was one of the best courses I've taken.
You do this course, you really get into the nitty-gritty of the activities that will make you comfortable with decentralized finance.
Thank you so much to Brian and everyone at London Real and the DeFi Academy for even putting together an amazing course like this.
Anybody else that wants to do it, please sign up. It is well worth the money.